What's up, YouTube? And today we're gonna be reacting to how humans got high in every time period. Now, I thought this video was gonna be really interesting considering I just quit smoking. I just quit getting high. So let's see how they were doing it. Let's see what they were doing. Let's see what they got going on. Let's get right into it.
If you've watched our videos over the last few months, then you probably know about people's obsession with obscure chemicals. And typically I'm not this coy with my verbiage, but YouTube's been giving me a
I'm
real
eating some
pattern
hot
lately,
wings and
so I'm trying
fries.
to be a good boy. With that being said, I've only really discussed chemicals people are taking in the modern day, but human consumption of obscure chemicals far predates even history itself. So in this video, I'm going to discuss the favorite concoctions of humans in every time period and how they use them to get high. Starting in the Stone Age. The Stone Age is one of the most interesting and mysterious time periods for substance consumption. Interesting because this is where it all started, and mysterious because of how unknown it really is. We have a rough idea of what exact plants were preferred during this time period, but we don't exactly know when they were first used or how often they were used at all. Some suggest that ancient humans dating back to our ape-like ancestors were using specific plants regularly, although there's rather limited archaeological evidence to support that, and others believe that the recreational consumption didn't begin until much later in human history, like roughly 10,000 years ago, which there is slightly more evidence for. But here's the thing, just because the evidence we have available to us shows that the earliest recorded consumption began around 8100 BC, it doesn't necessarily mean that's where it actually began. That's just all we have proof of. And unlike pottery, stones, or other artifacts, these organic compounds don't preserve well. With that being said, I know you guys come to trust me bro for only the most factual, historically accurate, nothing but the truth type content. No creative liberties or stretching of any truths. We're all facts here. So with that being said, we're going to focus on the consumption after 10,000 BC, where the invention of farming, herding, and civilization likely facilitated the use of these compounds. Or I should really just say plants. At this point in time, they're just plants. They're not even, they're just plants. But if you did want to speculate about early use, feel free to drop a comment. I'd love to open that conversation. Okay, so now that we have a framework for the timeline, what were these people in the Stone Age, or at least from 10,000 BC and beyond, getting up to? What were they lighting up?
Imagine being able to build an app with your name on it, just by thinking about it. Meet Base 44, a complete AI.
What do we gotta say to him, y'all? Shut that shit up immediately. Please get your ass home.
Lighten up. What were they chooching on? What were they fiending for? Well, I'll tell you. For starters, cannabis seeds appeared in archaeological digs dating back as far as 8100 BC in Asia. Now, does that just mean that's when it was used? It's hard to tell because the evidence doesn't suggest that, although it is possible. What we do know, however, is that in China, there was strong evidence for ritualistic use of cannabis by 500 BC, which is obviously no longer in the Stone Age, so we'll touch on that later. What we do have evidence for not only consumption, but also production of in the Stone Age is alcohol, specifically beer. By 10,000 BC, the Natufians have mastered the process of making beer. And although alcoholic beverages from this time period were significantly different than what we would consider to be modern day beer, the resemblance was there. Beer from 12,000 years ago had a rather low alcohol content of only 2 to 4%, and often contained additives such as fruit or honey, and most oddly, varied in consistency, from a clear liquid to a soupy mixture with floating solids and even pastes. Just imagine that. Beer soup with honey and fruit. Interesting. Researchers also suggest that there is a possibility that these people had also domesticated cereals, no, not the breakfast food, the actual grain category, for the specific purpose of brewing beer with them instead of eating them. As strange as this early beer sounded, it actually served a dual purpose. Not only was it likely enjoyable for the people consuming it, but it also was a great alternative to water, as the alcohol in this soupy mess killed harmful bacteria that would have otherwise made these people sick. And this is going to be a trend throughout all of history, both brewing beer and also drinking alcohol to avoid dirty water. So while people in the Middle East were making beer, what was going on in North America? Well, actually, a lot of things. Some of the primary...
Hold on. Let me check my recording tools because I think... Yeah, see, I knew it. I forgot to set this up right. All right, we good now.
customary and favored plants during the Stone Age were tobacco and coca. These were, of course, discovered and used by indigenous Americans, who not only liked their stimulants, but also had a particular fascination with psychedelics as well. Some of the available natural selection of psychedelics include peyote, morning glory, datura, salvia, ayahuasca, and over 20 different species of magic mushroom. To me, it's no wonder that indigenous Americans were so spiritual. You could be on the prairies foraging for natural goods and come back with a basket full of 20 different types of psychedelic. Insane. One interesting tradition that the indigenous Americans had when it came to tobacco and some of these hallucinogens was nasal administration, specifically inhaling tobacco through your nose, which I can only assume must have hurt, but I guess to them it was enjoyable. They must know something we don't know. One interesting piece of history is when the Spanish conquistadors visited the Mayan people, they were horrified by the Mayans' drug trips and saw it as the devil's work, which, if you know any...
Hold on. I'll be back. I feel like I damn near do this every fucking video. I was like, damn, this nigga stay getting up.
Mayan history, I don't fully blame them for that, considering some of their traditions. For example, human sacrifices, skull towers, slaves made into skin suits. Stuff like that doesn't strike me as angelic, per se. But however you look at it, psychedelics were a major part of development and tradition for indigenous American people. The reason why people would use these plants varies for most of the same reasons that people do even in this day. People are looking to either ease pain, experience a pleasant sensation, connect with a higher power, gods or lost loved ones, or simply provide them more energy to hunt, work, and endure Stone Age life. One popular Stone Age plant that was used to serve all of these purposes was the coca leaf. The coca leaf was readily available and was easily consumed, primarily being mixed with lime and being chewed until they had a stimulant effect. At that point, they would spit out the leaves and do it all over again, with some people chewing the stuff all day long. Although the exact origins of specific usage isn't known, it is confirmed that some of the earliest traditions for mind-altering chemicals date back all the way to at least 10,000 BC, and some fan favorites include tobacco, coca leaves, and a bundle of psychedelics. And you can't forget beer soup, the Bronze Age. The Bronze Age is really exciting because we have a lot more facts and a much larger variety of substances to cover. The plants we discovered in the Stone Age are still around, but we now have some new discoveries as well. One of the biggest and most impactful is opium. The opium poppy was first cultivated in Southwest Asia and is one of the oldest medicinal plants in recorded history. The first mention of the opium poppy was found on Sumerian clay.
What do we say to him, y'all?
This game.
Shut that shit up immediately. Let's get back to the video. Come on, bro.
From about 3000 BC, near the very beginning of the Bronze Age. These tablets were found at the spiritual center of the Sumerians, located just south of Baghdad, and appear to describe the cultivation of the opium poppy, including the collection of the poppy juice in the early morning, as well as the production of opium itself. The Sumerians literally named opium gil, or happiness, a term that is still applied to opium in certain cultures today. Pretty crazy how long this stuff has been around and how influential it was. It likely is one of the most influential plants on this list. Besides opium, archaeologists also discovered well-preserved strands of human hair in a 3,000-year-old burial site in Spain, revealing trace amounts of 3 different alkaloid substances associated with altered states. Now, they don't exactly know what these psychoactive substances were used for, but it is speculated that they were used for recreational purposes. Another huge innovation and entry into the lifted realm was wine. Early wine has actually appeared in Egyptian pictographs, and by the early Bronze Age, photographs actually showed the production of wine and beer as well. And they didn't just display it as some crazy thing. They showed it like it was business as usual. This stuff has been around. At the time, wine and other alcoholic beverages were not only used for pleasure, but they were also used for nutritional, medicinal, and religious purposes. Imagine if they advertised wine that way today. In 2600 BC, a Chinese emperor was actually studying the impact of alcohol on the public's health. He was curious why people did not live as long as they did before. And one of his people claimed, nowadays people use wine as a beverage, and they adopt reckless and unusual behavior. They devote all their attention to amusement of their mind, thus cutting themselves off from the joys of a long life. Their rising and retiring is without regularity. It's crazy how even 5,000 years ago, alcohol was having a negative impact on people's lives. And today, it's still popular as ever. At this time,
Most
China was
drugs is
really
gonna
on some other stuff. Because
negatively
not only were
affect
they
you
investigating the impacts of
outside of your
alcohol on the
mind,
public,
outside of
but
your
they were
body.
also bringing to market some of the most influential medicines of all time. During
And what I mean by that is it's gonna feel good on the inside. Like you're gonna feel good and shit, but in the outer realm, outer world, nigga, you're not doing shit. You're not going nowhere. You're not doing nothing. You're just drunk. You're just hot. It's fake, if you will.
During the Bronze Age, Emperor Sheng Nong discovered a wide range of medicines almost 5,000 years ago. These included the first caffeinated tea and ephedra, which was used to make amphetamines. Emperor Shen Nong prescribed tea for malaria, rheumatism, and poor memory. Caffeinated tea was also commonly an antidote to poisonous effects of other herbs. Ephedra was a natural stimulant that helped with asthma and was probably used for other things too. There's a reason that people still reference ancient Chinese medicine today. Even back in the Bronze Age, they were really on their stuff. Besides the discoveries of opium and amphetamines and wine, there was obviously a ton of development going on with tobacco, beer, and psychedelics. Tobacco was being traded and cultivated, beer production was being improved, and shamans were using psychedelics as a gateway to the other side. Definitely an interesting time to be around. Similar to the Stone Age, all of these substances had similar purposes, with a primary focus on religious and medicinal benefits, of course with some leisure mixed in there as well. The Iron Age. At this point, human development is ramping up to full speed, and honestly, a lot of the plants that we've discussed are still very much favored and very much so in use, with the only real difference being the scale of production and cultivation, as well as the documentation of their benefits and use cases. One of the most commonly cited plants that we see in the Iron Age is something you're likely familiar with. It may be something you're enjoying right now, that being cannabis. During this time in history, cannabis use was widespread, and use cases vary drastically, and some of them are kind of funny. In Mesopotamia, several clay tablets were found in a library that contained references to cannabis. Most of these references indicated the plants were used for either magical healing purposes or to drive away evil spirits or even illnesses, which is interesting. On the contrary, over in China, the use of cannabis in medicine was very early in its development. But according to a famous early book on Chinese herbal medicine, known as the Divine Farmer's Matura Medicina, cannabis, if taken in excess, will produce hallucinations, literally seeing devils. On the other hand, moderate use over a long time has benefits. If taken over a long time, it will make one communicate with spirits and lightens one's body. Definitely an interesting interpretation of the plant, and I feel like they were smoking some strong stuff. During this time, opium is also traded among the Silk Road. No, not that Silk Road, the actual Silk Road. And I think one of my favorite pieces of history from this time period is...
Oh my God.
Even when your
What do
room
we
is
gotta
80
say to
degrees,
him,
your
y'all?
bed can be 55.
Shut that shit up immediately. Man, get this dude out of here. Or this woman, whatever.
period is this. In the year 3 BC, there was a drinking contest in Greece that led to the death of 41 people. It is reported that a Greek drinking contest revealed that 41 contestants died of alcohol poisoning. Oddly enough, the winner did not die, at least not immediately. He actually took home prizes which included more wine, but he only lived for 4 more days before dying.
What?
Absolutely insane that there was drinking contests in 3 BC, and also the fact that so many people died at the same contest.
Niggas
That is
seen
wild. Near
everybody
the end of the
die,
Iron Age,
went
alcohol
home with the
became the
alcohol,
prominent psychoactive substance
still
during
drinking.
the Roman Empire. Catholic Christianity
That's
became the state
crazy.
church of the Roman Empire. And since alcohol was
I can't
often
eat
produced
it.
by abbeys and monasteries, it
I'm
became
full.
the people's favorite. During
I was
this time,
about
we
to,
weren't
but I
just
can't.
limited to beer or wine. They also had introduced cider and mead as well. And it was also around 100 BCE when Rome had caught up with Greece in wine production and trade. One interesting artifact that was found in the Iron Age are stones carved into mini mushrooms by the Guatemala.
Hold on, y'all. My bad. I don't know if I did this yet, this video, or I might have. Hold on. I'm good. So give me 1 second. Hold on. That's the video.
Guatemalans. A set of 9 stones was found that is believed to be associated with the 9 lords of the night and gods of the underworld. One study of these miniature sculptures suggests that these stones may have been used to grind up the mushrooms to prepare them for ceremonial consumption, which is cool, but it's also crazy that they also depicted 9 lords of an underworld on their mushroom carving. They must have been seeing some stuff. It was also at this time when Plato argued that alcohol is a good test of someone's character. Plato argued that drinking with someone is the simplest, fastest, and most reliable way to test someone's
That's true,
character.
kind of.
This is because wine stimulates the emotion, including desires or pleasures of questionable moral worth. So if you want to get to know someone else's character
I
or
think
even
people
your
still
own
do that
character,
today.
according to Plato, get drunk. Interestingly, in Asia, the Persian king advised his army to take advantage of their opponent's lack of experience of alcohol to defeat them, and literally used feast and alcohol as a military strategy. The idea was if the Persians were able to provide their enemies with large, generous portions of lamb and large amounts of wine in which they had no experience with, they would become so infatuated with the feast and compelling feeling of this drink that they would be too distracted to even compete with the Persians in accomplishing great things. Definitely an interesting strategy. Chewing coca leaves was still popular as ever in the Iron Age, and they even discovered multiple ceramic figures depicting characters.
That actually sounds like something else that the government did not too long ago, but we ain't gonna get into that. I'll say that for another video.
Chewing coca leaves from 500 BC. So if you wanted to know how people got lifted in the Iron Age, the Greeks and Romans
you
were
know, you
literally
know,
turning into frat bros, drinking until they died. People in Asia were smoking until they saw the devil. And people in Guatemala were taking mushrooms until they saw the 9 lords of the underworld. I think the most normal thing to come out of this time period and their psychoactive substances is Plato's analysis on alcohol. It definitely was a funny time. The medieval era. One of the craziest substances we've talked about on this list is now about to be revealed. Technically, it was used at the end of the Iron Age and at the beginning and during the Middle Ages, but I wanted to add it here because this chemical is just so crazy and so insane. What I'm talking about, of course, is cacao, also known as chocolate. During this time, from roughly 250 AD to 900 AD, there was an abundance of physical and symbolic traces of cacao and chocolate left behind, specifically by the Mayan people. This evidence includes both physical evidence of cacao residue left on vessels, basically little pottery bowls and stuff, as well as cacao being mentioned directly on scriptures. It was believed that cacao was used for social, religious, and once again, ritualistic factors, which is interesting. It kind of reminds me of like that live action Charlie the Chocolate Factory movie, where they're in the forest with the Oompa Loompas, like when he first makes connection with them and they're like having this religious connection to the cacao plant. It's basically like that. Maybe that's what it was inspired by. But yeah, the Mayans were loving their chocolate. Around 900 AD, we also see the first mention of coffee in print. This was found printed by a Persian physician in Iran. And it's interesting how long it took us to get from tea to coffee. But yeah, another crazy psychoactive substance. So far, they're just having the average morning meal. Nothing too crazy so far. The travels of Marco Polo from roughly 1200 AD noted that rice wine was actually more popular than grape wine in China, saying, quote, "Most of the people in China drink wine of a kind that I shall not describe. It is a liquor which they brew of rice with a quantity of excellent spice, in such a fashion that it makes better drink than any other kind of wine." I guess it kind of makes sense geographically why they would prefer rice wine over a grape wine, but it's interesting that somebody who was used to grape wine actually preferred rice wine. He also made sure to note that, quote, "Rice wine makes one drunk sooner than any other wine." China was really just living it up at this time. They were smoking until they saw devils, and they were drinking until they could not anymore. Well, maybe not anymore. That was the Greeks. The Greeks were drinking to death, but China was probably in close second. It was around this time we also started to see the prohibition of certain substances, specifically cannabis in the Middle East. Wine and gambling at this time were explicitly prohibited in the Quran, but there was no specific text that gave guidance on hashish or cannabis. The general legal attitude was that cannabis should be banned despite the fact that it was widely used among Muslim populations. Occasionally, governments tried to take a drastic step against it, but with little success. From 1223 to 1277, there was a prohibition on wine and cannabis that involved the death penalty for those who used either.
Damn.
But it's noted that this prohibition didn't stop consumption and only caused the killing and maiming of people. So although they were trying to get rid of wine and weed, one thing that they were ramping up production of was coffee. During this time, the first coffee trees were being cultivated on the Arabian Peninsula. And at first, coffee was used for medicinal and religious purposes, like many chemicals of this time. Funnily enough, the way that this was used for religious purposes was claimed that it would be used to help people stay awake during long religious ceremonies, which to me is hilarious because it's like, here, take this. This is going to be long and boring. But hey, if it works, it works. Honestly, medieval times seems like a pretty chill time with a lot of cool innovations like chocolate and coffee, and also some interesting attempts at prohibition. I think it's safe to say that at this time, the most common substance of choice was definitely alcohol, as its recreational use was ramped up significantly. I think one interesting example that showcases this pretty well is the fact that they used distilled spirits as a prescribed medicine during the Black Death. During the mid-1300s, distilled spirits were prescribed by doctors during the Black Plague, with the thought that it would help them fight off the disease.
It was giving these niggas to vodka for the Black Plague.
It's not just about saving time, it's about expanding what's possible.
Shut that shit up, Sandeep. Baljeet. Get the dagger. Let me stop. I'm sorry. That was so trash. My bad. Shouldn't have said that. I'm gonna edit that out.
Fight off the disease internally. Ironically, this led to a lot of overconsumption of alcohol because people wanted to be extremely cautious, which is just kind of ironic and hilarious to think that people would be chugging essentially medieval vodka to help protect them from a extremely deadly disease. I guess at that point, if you're gonna go out, at least go out happy. Medieval times, dope. The early modern era. The early modern era is an extremely exciting time for people enlightening themselves, specifically because there is so much recorded evidence of different use cases, prohibitions, legalizations, declarations, and other recorded events associated with different psychoactive chemicals. And spoiler alert, there's not a ton of new introductions. However, the use cases of the chemicals and plants that we've described so far have definitely taken a change and now have adapted some interesting relationships with different cultures. For starters, in 1475 AD in Turkey, the world's first coffee shop was opened, which is really cool to think that coffee shops have been around for so long. Over in Europe, the introduction of the printing press has allowed a broader distribution of information about alcohol, which is a huge win for safety. For a short period of time, coffee was actually banned in Mecca, as it was claimed to be an intoxicant, and the governor of Mecca actually shut down all of the coffee houses, although shortly after his superior overruled him and opened them back up. Excitingly, cacao had made its way over to Europe, first at Spain and then the rest of Europe. The first official voyage of cacao got delivered from modern-day Mexico to modern-day Spain in 1585, and at the time, cacao was served as a drink. Also at this time, smoking was introduced to the Europeans from indigenous Americans. Initially, Spanish friars in the Caribbean and Mexico believed that tobacco was the devil's weed, and the traditional indigenous smoking of it was sinful. However, French and English voyagers took note of the practice of smoking tobacco and brought the idea back home to Europe, where it quickly spread across Europe, Middle East, Africa, and Asia. It's almost hard to imagine Europe without tobacco at this point. Shortly after the popularization of tobacco, once again, during the plague, physicians were recommending tobacco as a disinfectant, and even stated that people who smoked tobacco regularly had lower rates of infection. And one of the funniest things is that Pope Clement VIII declared coffee as a Christian drink, specifically because most people associated it with Islamic culture, because it was brought to Europe by traders from the Middle East. It's stated that Pope Clement tried coffee for the first time and then decreed it as a Christian drink, which is kind of hilarious. Could you imagine being a trader from the Middle East, bringing a gift to the Pope, sharing your culture with him, watching him try it for the first time and seeing the delight on his face, only for him to instantly decree, yes, this is great. This is a Christian drink. Thank you. Thank you so much for this Christian drink. And they're like, actually, we've been, you know what, sure. Crazy, but, you know, times were different. During this time, prohibitions are popping up and down everywhere, and coffee houses are exploding. Not literally, just they're getting popular. Maybe a few exploded, I don't know. In 1663, English coffee houses were actually required to be licensed. And in 1676, the first coffee house opened up in Boston. And believe it or not, it wasn't a Starbucks. During the 30-Year War, Dutch soldiers kept bottles of what was known as Dutch courage on their belt, which was actually a flask of gin. During these battles, the British actually took note and began doing the same thing as well, which I don't blame them. If I was in a war that was 30 years long, I think I'd be sipping a little bit too. Tobacco prohibition was happening in both Russia and Japan, although in Japan it was relatively short-lived. So yeah, during the early modern era, the legendary combo of coffee and cigarettes was booming, essentially all over the world. And although some people wanted to ban it, there was really no way to go about it, as the trade was booming and people wanted their caffeine and nicotine bad. It's so interesting to see the first discovery of a plant and then worldwide stores selling a product made from this plant pop up in the matter of 100 years. That's just, to me, so cool to see. Humans are honestly awesome, and that's why I love these time period videos. But we're still not done yet. The modern era. One of the first and most significant events that took place was the London gin craze. The English took their interest in Dutch courage a little bit too far, because now, after the king and parliament encouraged the production of gin to increase the price of grain and provide tax revenue, this resulted in the price of gin dropping dramatically, which exponentially boosted the consumption, particularly among the poor. Now that the gin was so cheap, any regular old person could afford to maintain a solid buzz 24/7, and this was causing havoc among the British people. I think there was a lot of reasons to drink during the early 1700s, especially in London. Religious dissent, rebellion, corrupt politicians, displaced people, all factors that were contributing to an unstable society. People were packed in tight, small, dirty rooms. Living and working conditions sucked. Most people were poor, so if there was any sort of joy or escape that you could afford, why wouldn't you? The upper class blamed the production of gin for all of the issues that British society was having, but realistically, the consumption of gin was only because of how low the quality of life was at this time. The government did eventually begin to control the gin craze through a series of what was known as gin acts. That alone is a pretty crazy start to the modern era. In 1830,
Man, y'all notice how every time niggas get to doing drugs and they happy and they straight, the government try to take it away? That's just so crazy. Like, them niggas always taking, like, this whole video, they'll get a drug, then everybody had a drug, and then it'll start killing people, so I guess that's why they're taking it away. But then the rich people still got the drug, you know what I'm saying? They just made it so that the poor people didn't have it, I guess. I don't know. That shit weird.
1832, a French chemist was the first person to isolate codeine, which is a alkaloid of the naturally occurring opium that at this point has been used for hundreds of years. Codeine is still widely used today, and in modern times is synthesized from morphine through a chemical process. Moving over to China, Emperor Yang Cheng prohibited the sale of opium for smoking. It was still legal to use medicinally, but if you were using it recreationally, you were killed. Although this didn't really have an impact on any of the trade routes or consumption because officials were for the most part corrupt, and the demand and supply chain was stronger than the government could keep up with. A separate French chemist also discovered morphine, which, like codeine, comes from the opium plant and is still used heavily to this day. And during the early 1800s, it was prescribed by physicians often for pain relief. But by the 1870s, physicians began to express concerns because of the morphine habit that it was causing, which is, of course, a pretty severe addiction. In 1869, the Prohibition Party was established in the United States of America, which was essentially looking to achieve widespread social reform about alcohol and wanted to have legislation that would prohibit the sale and manufacturing of alcohol in the US. And seemingly one by one, countries began to prohibit different substances for different reasons. It's also at this time that we see a lot of interesting companies pop up. For example, Folgers Coffee Company was founded in 1850. Miller Brewing Company was founded in 1855. Lipton Tea was established in 1890. And Coca-Cola was invented in 1886. Besides companies popping up, we also see a lot of drugs popping up. We saw amphetamines being introduced. We saw LSD synthesized in the late 1930s. We saw oxycodone first synthesized in the 1910s. And in the 1940s, people in Japan got their first taste of meth. I wonder where they got it from. What were Japan and Germany up to in the 1940s? The modern day is honestly a super interesting time because we see the industrialization of all of these compounds that, for the most part, have been around for hundreds and thousands of years. And not only do we see a lot of companies pop up, but we also see a lot of legislation, specifically regarding to temperance and regulation. And we also see the first introduction of a lot of synthetic, or at least processed chemicals that we now would consider to be pharmaceuticals. It's truly crazy how fast things have developed. And I guess these are all more or less of a byproduct of the Industrial Revolution, which I would consider to be a huge landmark in civilization and human history as a whole. I bet you guys are curious about what are the craziest, scariest, and deadliest examples of drugs that people are taking in the modern day. And if that's something that interests you, then I have something for you. But unfortunately, it's not in this video. On screen right now, I want you to watch this playlist about the craziest drugs you've never heard of, in which I go into detail about specific chemicals and drugs that people are taking in the modern day.
That was a good video, y'all. It told us a lot about history and how drugs been around. Niggas been doing drugs to escape whatever their situation is. It makes me wonder, how would their situation be if they just stayed sober? Could be better, it could be worse. I don't know. Other than that, though, I'm out.